Les Topic 1 Lecture 1. Introduction to Ethics. Topic Overview 1/2. Introduction. Subjective relativism. Cultural relativism. Divine command theory. Kantianism. Topic Overview 2 halves. Act utilitarianism. Rule utilitarianism. Social contract theory. Comparing workable ethical theories. Morality of breaking the law. Introduction. Taking the ethical point of view. Defining terms. 4 scenarios. Overview of ethical theories. The ethical point of view. No man is an island, entire of itself. John Donne. Forming communities allows us to enjoy better lives than if we lived in isolation. But being part of a community also has a price. Some actions have to be taken, others are not allowed, and people who do not conform are punished. There are times when it is not always clear what is the right thing to do. Sometimes there are conflicting choices to make. Ethics helps us decide what is the right choice of action to take in a particular situation. In this module we look at situations that can occur within the world of computers. The ethical point of view. How do you decide what is important in our lives? In this section we look at the ethical theories to see what they can contribute. These theories have been used for a very long time. There are many different theories. We will only take a brief overview of these theories here, but people have spent years studying them. The ethical point of view. Virtually everybody shares core values, what is important to them, life, happiness, ability to accomplish goals. 2 ways to view world. Selfish point of view, consider only own core values. Ethical point of view, respect other people and their core values as well. But even taking the ethical view, there will still be disagreements about what is the right thing to do in a particular situation. There are different ethical theories, which ones are useful to us. Defining terms. Society. Association of people organized under a system of rules. Rules advance the good of members over time. Morality. A society's rules of conduct. What people ought not to do in various situations. Ethics. Rational examination of morality. Evaluation of people's behavior. Why study ethics? Not everyone can do what they want. Ethics, a way to decide the best thing to do. New problems accompany new technologies. Rapid change in society with mobile technology, broadband internet, sophisticated games, etc. bringing many benefits. However, some people selfishly exploit these new technologies for personal gain to the detriment of others. E.g. email is very useful but spam is not. Common wisdom, not always adequate. How do you decide what is good, what is bad, in this ever-changing world? Scenario 1. Alexis, a gifted Leaving Cert student, wants to become a doctor. She needs a grant and high points to get onto a medicine course. For her studies she needs to use the internet. She has no computer herself, and the ones at school always have a queue, and Alexis works after school. Some evenings Alexis goes to a private college and uses their computers. When asked, she says she is one of their students. Using the resources of this library, Alexis gets good grades and goes on to study medicine. Scenario 1. Did Alexis do anything wrong? Who benefited from Alexis's course of action? Who was hurt by Alexis's course of action? Did Alexis have an unfair advantage over her high school classmates? Would any of your answers change if it turns out Alexis did not win a college scholarship after all? In what other ways could Alexis have accomplished her objective? Scenario 2. An organization works to reduce spam in America, tries unsuccessfully to get ISPs in an East Asia country to stop the spam that originates from them. When this is unsuccessful, they put the addresses of these ISPs on a blacklist, with the result: spam in America dropped by 25%. Tens of thousands of innocent computer users in the East Asian country cannot send email to friends and businesses in America. Scenario 2. Did the anti-spam organization do anything wrong? Did the ISPs that refused to accept email from the blacklisted ISPs do anything wrong? Who benefited from the organization's action? Who was hurt by the organization's action? Could the organization have achieved its goals through a better course of action? Scenario 3. To deter speeding, East Dakota State Police (EDSP) connects video cameras to all motorway overpasses. Cameras are connected to computers that detect speeding cars. Sophisticated image recognition software then reads license plate numbers and also pictures of drivers. If picture of driver matches license photo, a speeding ticket is sent out. Reduces speeding by 90%. FBI requests and gets access to this system, and uses this information to arrest 5 people they suspect of a crime. Scenario 3. Did the East Dakota State Police do anything wrong? Who benefited from the actions of the EDSP? Who was harmed by the actions of the EDSP? What other courses of action could the EDSP have taken to achieve its objectives? Scenario 4. You are senior software engineer at a startup company developing an exciting new handheld computer that will revolutionize how nurses keep track of patients. Your company's sales force has promised these will be ready next week. Testers at the company have found bugs, all of which seem to be minor, but they cannot be sure that there aren't serious errors in the software until they complete tests. There is fierce competition in the medical software industry. Another company is about to release similar software very soon, so it is critical to your company that you are first to have this software out there. Scenario 4. Should you recommend release of the product next week? Who will benefit if the company follows your recommendation? Who will be harmed if the company follows your recommendation? Do you have an obligation to any group of people that may be affected by your decision? How do you decide what is right or wrong? What guided your thinking? What process did you use to decide what was right or wrong in these scenarios? Were your reasons consistent from one scenario to the next? If someone disagreed with you, how would you convince that person that your position made more sense? More on ethics. Ethics, rational, systematic analysis of behavior that can cause benefit or harm to other people. Doing ethics, answers need explanations. People are required to explain why they hold the opinions they do. Explanations, facts, shared values, logic. Ethics is concerned with the voluntary, moral choices people make because they decide to take one course of action over another. Not concerned with involuntary choices, e.g. reflex action to avoid pedestrian swerve and crash. Not concerned with choices outside the moral realm, e.g. choice of car color is outside ethics. Workable ethical theory produces explanations that might be persuasive to a skeptical, yet open-minded audience. Overview of ethical theories. Since the Greek philosopher Socrates 2,500 years ago, many philosophers have proposed many ethical theories. We will review some of these. How do we decide which are useful? A useful theory allows us to examine moral problems, reach conclusions, and defend these conclusions in front of a skeptical, yet open-minded audience. We will look at several ethical theories in the next lectures. Les Topic 1 Lecture 2. Introduction to Ethics. Topic Overview 1/2. Introduction. Subjective relativism. Cultural relativism. Divine command theory. Kantianism. Topic Overview 2 halves. Act utilitarianism. Rule utilitarianism. Social contract theory. Comparing workable ethical theories. Morality of breaking the law. Relativism. We will consider two kinds of relativism: subjective relativism and cultural relativism. No universal norms of right and wrong. One person can say, X is right, another can say, X is wrong, and both can be right. We will consider two kinds of relativism: subjective relativism, and cultural relativism. Subjective relativism. Each person decides right and wrong for himself or herself. What's right for you may not be right for me. Case for subjective relativism. Well-meaning and intelligent people disagree on moral issues, e.g. argument about legalized abortion, Lisbon Treaty, etc., for has many reasonable people arguing on each side of issue. Morality is not something out there that we discover and try to understand, instead each of us creates his or her own morality. Ethical debates are disagreeable and pointless. When faced with difficult moral problem, who is to say which side is correct? If morality is relative, we do not have to reconcile opposing views, both sides are right. Case against subjective relativism blurs distinction between doing what you think is right and doing what you want to do. People are good at rationalizing their bad behavior. If morality means doing what you wanted to do, it doesn't mean much. Makes no moral distinction between the actions of different people. Some people have caused millions to suffer, others have led lives of great service. Both groups have spent their lives doing what they thought was the right thing to do. A modification of subject relativism might be, I decide what's right for me, as long as my actions don't hurt anybody else. But what do we mean by harm someone? This statement is inconsistent with subjective relativism. Case against subjective relativism. Senior and tolerance are two different things. Senior seems to be about tolerance, which is good, and allows individuals in a diverse society to live in harmony. But tolerance is not the same as senior. Senior holds that individuals decide for themselves what is right and wrong. If you are a tolerant person, is it okay with you if some people decide they want to be intolerant? If we say, people ought to be tolerant, this is an example of a universal moral norm or rule. Relativism is based on the idea that there are not universal moral norms. Decisions may be based on something other than reason. In this theory, people can reach conclusions by any means they see fit: feelings, roll of dice, tarot cards, etc. Not a workable ethical theory. If your goal is to persuade others that your solution to an actual moral problem is correct, senior is self-defeating. Cultural relativism. If senior is unworkable, what about different views of right and wrong held by different societies at the same point in time? Cultural relativism (CR) is the ethical theory that the meaning of right and wrong rests within a society's actual moral guidelines. These guidelines vary from place to place and from time to time. A particular action may be right in one society at one time and wrong in another society or at another time. Cultural relativism. For example, you are a passenger in a car driven by your friend who is speeding when he knocks down a pedestrian. You are only witness. Friend's lawyer says that if you testify that your friend was only driving at 20 miles per hour, your friend will probably get off. What right has your friend to expect you to protect him? Who would be helped, who would be harmed by this lie? Cultural relativism. Quinn points out that 90% of Norwegians would not testify to lower speed as they do not believe the person's friend has a definite right to expect help. 10% of Yugoslavians feel the same. 75% of Americans and Canadians feel the same. 50% of Mexicans feel the same. Cultural relativists say we ought to pay attention to these differences. Case for cultural relativism. Different social contexts demand different moral guidelines. No one set of guidelines can work for all human societies in every part of the world for all of time. 10,000 years ago, most of people's time was spent getting enough food to survive. Technology resulted in overpopulation, environmental problems. People must change their ideas about what is acceptable conduct and what is not, or they will destroy the planet. Quinn p. 63. It is arrogant for one society to judge another. West may have more technology than more primitive societies, but people there are no more intelligent. It is arrogant for a person living in 21 STC America to judge actions of another person who lived in Peru in the 15th century. Quinn p. 63. Morality is reflected in actual behavior. What people say is right or wrong is not always reflected in what they actually do. Case against cultural relativism. Because two societies do have different moral views doesn't mean they ought to have different views. Perhaps one set of guidelines is good and the other is bad. Perhaps neither set are good. If we accept CR, we cannot speak out against a culture that is different from our own, even if it seems to be blatantly wrong. CR doesn't explain how an individual determines the moral guidelines of a particular society. If I am new to a society and want to follow its guidelines, how do I find out what they are? I can only ask individuals who are likely to answer with their own beliefs. What I need to know are society's views as a whole. Perhaps they are in the laws, but laws take time to be made and may not be up to date. Case against cultural relativism doesn't explain how guidelines evolve. American universities used to be color segregated, challenged by a few brave people of color who challenged the status quo and enrolled in universities that had been the exclusive preserve of white students. Quinn p. 64. They went against the accepted moral standards of the time, but by today's view this seems right, even heroic. Provides no way out for cultures in conflict. Even when the values of each society lead to actions that harm the other, CR says each society's moral guidelines are right. CR does not provide a way for the two sides to find common ground. Because many practices are acceptable does not mean any cultural practice is acceptable. Any fallacy. E.g. documentation styles for computer program. Many good ways to add comments to a computer program, but this does not mean that any commenting style is good. It is false that all possible cultural practices have equal legitimacy. Certain practices must be forbidden, and other must be mandated if a society is to survive. Quinn from Moore. Case against cultural relativism. Societies, in fact, share certain core values. James Rachels argues that all societies, in order to maintain their existence, must have a set of core values. Some are common to all societies, e.g. helpless babies must be cared for, people must not be attacked or murdered. Shared core values could be used as a starting point to create a universal ethical theory that would not have the deficiencies of CR. Only indirectly based on reason. Many moral guidelines are a result of tradition, rather than because it makes sense. CR is poor at explaining why something is right or wrong. An explanation in one society may not work in another. CR is more concerned with ethical evaluations than facts and reason. Not a workable ethical theory. Does not work for a diverse audience. Divine command theory. Three great religions that arose in Middle East. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, teach that a single God is the creator of the universe and that human beings are part of God's creation. For a religious person, living life aligned to the will of God is important. Divine command theory. Good actions, those aligned with God's will. Bad actions, those contrary to God's will. Holy books reveal God's will. We should holy books as moral decision-making guides. Case for divine command theory. We owe obedience to our Creator. God created the universe, and us. We are dependent on God for our lives and are obligated to follow God's rules. God is all good and all-knowing. God loves us and wants what is best for us. God is omniscient, we are not, so God knows better than we do what we must do to be happy. God is the ultimate authority. Since most people are religious in some sense, more likely to submit to God's law than a law made by people. Society benefits when everyone obeys the moral laws. Case against divine command theory. Different holy books disagree. No single holy book recognized by people of all faiths. Even among Christians, different versions of the Bible. People who read the same version and same translation can interpret the same verse in different ways. Society is multicultural, secular. Especially with migration of people, this is becoming more and more so. Some moral problems not addressed in Scripture. Current technological changes in society are not reflected in the holy books, e.g. no mention of the Internet. When we discuss moral problem arising from information technology, a proponent of the divine command theory must resort to analogy. At this point the conclusion is based not simply on what appears in the sacred text but also in the insight of the person who invented the analogy. Quinn pp. 67-58. The good does not equal God, equivalence fallacy. What does God is good mean? Is an action good because God commands it, or does God command it because it is good? Good is something outside of God. In that case we can talk about what good means outside of a discussion about God, based on obedience, not reason. Divine command theory. The fact that moral guidelines are not the result of a logical progression from a set of underlying principles, means that the divine command theory often fails to persuade skeptical listeners whose religious beliefs are different, not always workable in a secular society. Les Topic 1 Lecture 3. Introduction to Ethics. Topic Overview 1/2. Introduction. Subjective relativism. Cultural relativism. Divine command theory. Kantianism. Topic Overview 2 halves. Act utilitarianism. Rule utilitarianism. Social contract theory. Comparing workable ethical theories. Morality of breaking the law. Kantianism. Named after the German philosopher Immanuel Kant, who believed that people's actions ought to be guided by moral laws, and that these laws were universal. In order to apply to all rational beings, these laws must be based on reason. Many of Kant's moral laws also are in the Bible, but Kant's approach allows these laws to be derived logically. Kantianism goes beyond stating that an action is right or wrong, and also explains why it is right or wrong. Kantianism asks what is always good. Lots of things are good, such as intelligence and courage, but can also be used in a harmful way. Kant concludes that the only thing that is always good without qualification is goodwill. Even if the result is not as good as intended, goodwill is always good. Goodwill is when we try to do the right thing, not always what we want. But it is not always clear what we ought to do. Kantian analysis of a moral problem focuses on the will behind the action, and ignores circumstances that could be used by some to excuse behavior. Categorical imperative 1est formulation. Act only from moral rules that you can at the same time will to be universal moral laws. Illustration of first formulation. Question: can a person in dire straits make a promise with the intention of breaking it later? Proposed rule: I may make promises with the intention of later breaking them. The person in trouble wants his promise to be believed so he can get what he needs. Universalize rule: everyone may make and break promises. Everyone breaking promises would make promises unbelievable, contradicting desire to have promise believed. The rule is flawed. The answer is no. Categorical imperative, second formulation. Act so that you treat both yourself and other people as ends in themselves and never only as a means to an end. This is usually an easier formulation to work with than the first formulation of the categorical imperative. Plagiarism scenario. Carla, single mother, works full-time, takes 2 evening courses, semester, computer class, requires more work than normal. Carla earning an A on all work so far. Carla doesn't have time to write final report. Carla purchases report and submits it as her own work. Kantian evaluation, 1est formulation. Carla wants credit for plagiarized report. Assumes rule: you may claim credit for work performed by someone else. If rule universalized, reports would no longer be credible indicators of students' knowledge, and lecturers would not give credit for reports. Proposal: moral rule is self-defeating. It is wrong for Carla to turn in a purchased report. Kantian evaluation, 2nd formulation. Carla submitted another person's work as her own. She attempted to deceive lecturer. She treated lecturer as a means to an end. End, passing the course. Means, lecturer issues grade. What Carla did was wrong. Case for Kantianism. Rational. produces universal moral guidelines apply to all people and for all of history. Guidelines allow us to make clear moral judgments. Treats all persons as moral equals logical framework to combat discrimination. Workable ethical theory can be used to analysis real-world situations. Case against Kantianism. Sometimes no single rule adequately characterizes an action. To analyze a situation, we need to know the moral rule that motivated an action, but this underlying motivation is not always clear-cut. Birch gives example of stealing to feed my starving children. Am I stealing? Caring for my children? Saving innocent people? There is no way to resolve a conflict between rules. One solution to the previous problem is to have more than one rule, but what if these conflict? Kantianism allows no exceptions to moral laws. No scope for flexibility, e.g. lying is always wrong, and even when a small white lie about someone's new haircut would help them feel good and telling the truth would harm your relationship with them, telling a lie is always wrong. Kantianism. While it has weaknesses, Kantianism supports moral decision-making based on logical reasoning from facts and commonly held values. It is culture-neutral and treats all humans as equals. It is a workable ethical theory. Act utilitarianism. English philosophers Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill very different to Kantianism. An action is good if it benefits someone. An action is bad if it harms someone. Utility, tendency of an object to produce happiness or prevent unhappiness for an individual or a community. Happiness equals advantage equals benefit equals good equals pleasure. Unhappiness equals disadvantage equals cost equals evil equals pain. Principle of utility, greatest happiness principle. An action is right, or wrong, to the extent that it increases, or decreases, the total happiness of the affected parties. To make a moral evaluation, add up, over all affected beings, the change in their happiness. Who are these morally significant beings? Different interpretations. To perform an analysis of a problem, first determine who is affected by it. Act utilitarianism. Utilitarianism. Morality of an action has nothing to do with intent. Focuses on the consequences. A consequentialist theory. Act utilitarianism. Add up change in happiness of all affected beings. Some greater than zero, action is good. Some less than zero, action is bad. Bentham, weighing pleasure, pain. Benham considers a complete analysis must go beyond simply listing benefits and harms. They don't all have the same weight. To measure them, he proposed 7 attributes. Intensity, magnitude of the experience. Duration, how long it lasts. Certainty, probability it will actually happen. Propinquity, how close the experience is in time and space. Fecundity, its ability to produce more experiences of the same kind. Purity, extent to which pleasure is not diluted by pain. Extent, number of people affected. Highway routing scenario. State may replace a curvy stretch of highway. New highway segment 1 mile shorter. 150 houses would have to be removed. Some wildlife habitat would be destroyed. Evaluation. Costs. $20 million to compensate homeowners. $10 million to construct new highway. Lost wildlife habitat worth $1 million. Benefits. $39 million savings in automobile driving costs. Conclusion. Benefits exceed costs. Building highway a good action. Case for Act utilitarianism. Focuses on happiness. Intuitive. Down-to-earth, practical. Focuses on the total net good. Comprehensive. Takes into account all elements of a particular situation. Workable ethical theory. Case against Act utilitarianism. Unclear whom to include in calculations, yet changes in who to include could change the overall decision. Too much work takes a lot of time and effort, not appropriate for every moral problem. Ignores our innate sense of duty, focuses only on the consequences of each particular situations. Susceptible to the problem of moral luck, what if the result of an action is unintended. This approach still evaluates in terms of consequences. Rule utilitarianism. Developed as a response to the weakness of ACT utilitarianism. We ought to adopt moral rules which, if followed by everyone, will lead to the greatest increase in total happiness. ACT utilitarianism applies principle of utility to individual actions. Rule utilitarianism applies principle of utility to moral rules. Rule utilitarianism. A rule utilitarianism chooses to follow rules whose universal adoption would lead to the greatest happiness. A Kantian follows a moral rule because it is in accord with a categorical imperative all human beings to be treated as ends in themselves, not merely as a means to an end. Rule utilitarianism is looking at the consequences of an action, while the Kantian is looking at the will motivating the action. Anti-worm scenario. August 2003, blaster worm infected thousands of Windows computers. Soon after, Nachi worm appeared. Took control of vulnerable computer. Located and destroyed copies of Blaster. Downloaded software patch to fix security problem. Used computer as launching pad to try to infect other vulnerable PCs. Evaluation using rule utilitarianism. To analyze a problem using rule utilitarianism, think of an appropriate moral rule and determine if its universal adoption would increase the happiness of the affected parties. Propose rule: if I can write a helpful worm that removes a harmful worm from infected computers and shields them from future attacks, I should do so. What would be the benefits if everyone followed the universal adoption of this rule? People who do not update their system would be better off. What harm would be caused by universal adoption of the rule? Every harmful worm would generate lots of other worms designed to eradicate it, networks extra traffic. What about unintentional bugs in helpful worms? Evaluation using rule utilitarianism. Who would benefit? People who do not keep their systems updated. Who would be harmed? People who use networks. People whose computers are invaded by buggy anti-worms. System administrators. Who would benefit? People who do not keep their systems updated. Conclusion: harm outweighs benefits. Releasing anti-worm is wrong. Case for rule utilitarianism. Compared to ACT utilitarianism, it is easier to perform the utilitarian calculus. Not every moral decision requires performing utilitarian calculus. Using rules of behavior means that every situation does not have to be analyzed. Moral rules survive exceptional situations. Avoids the problem of moral luck interested in the typical results of an action. Workable ethical theory. Case against utilitarianism in general. All consequences must be measured on a single scale. How do you measure happiness or benefit? Something like money is easy to measure, but what about intangible benefits? Utilitarianism ignores the problem of an unjust distribution of good consequences. Sometimes stated as having goal to promote the greatest good of the greatest number of people. What about the people who do not benefit? Utilitarianism does not mean the greatest good of the greatest number. That requires a principle of justice. What happens when a conflict arises between the principle of utility and a principle of justice? Rule utilitarianism. Treats all people as equals, can give reasons why a particular action is right or wrong. Is a workable theory for evaluating moral problems. Les Topic 1 Lecture 4. Topic Overview 1/2. Introduction. Subjective relativism. Cultural relativism. Divine command theory. Kantianism. Topic Overview 2/2. ACT utilitarianism. Rule utilitarianism. Social contract theory. Comparing workable ethical theories. Morality of breaking the law. Social contract theory. Philosopher Thomas Hobbes (1603–1697) lived during English Civil War and saw firsthand the terrible consequences of social anarchy. Wrote book Leviathan, and argued that without rules and a means of enforcing them, people would not bother to create anything of value, because nobody would be sure of keeping what they created. Instead, people would be consumed with taking what they needed and defending themselves against the attacks of others. Is this still relevant today? When America invaded Iraq, government ministries were looted, and arms merchants did a thriving business selling AK-47 assault rifles to homeowners needing protection from thieves. Social contract theory. Thomas Hobbes, State of Nature, miserable conditions where people would live in continual fear and danger of violent death, and life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish and short. To avoid the state of nature, rational people understand that cooperation is needed. However, cooperation is possible only when people mutually agree to follow certain guidelines. We implicitly accept a social contract, establishment of moral rules to govern relations among citizens. Government capable of enforcing these rules. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Critical problem facing society is to find a way to guarantee that everyone their safety and property, yet enables each person to remain free. In ideal society, no one above rules. That prevents society from enacting bad rules. James Rachel's definition. Slide 3-6. Morality consists in the set of rules, governing how people are to treat one another, that rational people will agree to accept, for their mutual benefit, on the condition that others follow those rules as well. Social contract theory, Kantianism. Like Kantianism, based on the idea that there are universal moral rules that can be derived through a rational process. The difference is in how we decide what makes a moral rule ethical. Kantianism: it is right for me to act according to a moral rule if the rule can be universalist. Social contract theory: it is right for me to act according to a moral rule if rational people would collectively accept it as binding because of its benefits to the community. Social contract theory: evaluate moral problems from point of view of moral rights. Kant argued that rights follow from duties, hence Kantians evaluate moral problems from duties or obligations. Civil disobedience is difficult to justify under Kantianism and utilitarianism, but with social contract theory, civil disobedience can be the morally right decision when standing up to injustices. Social contract theory. Hobbes, Locke and other philosophers held that all morally significant beings have rights, such as the right to life, liberty and property. Some modern philosophers add other rights, such as the right to privacy. Social contract theory. Close link between rights and duties. If you have the right to life, then others have the duty not to kill you. If you have the right to free healthcare, others have the duty to make sure you receive it. Rights can be classified according to duties to others. A negative right is a right that another can guarantee by leaving you alone to exercise your right, e.g. the right of free expression. In order for you to have that right, all others have to do is not interfere when you express yourself. A positive right is one that obligates others to do something on your behalf, e.g. free education. In order for you to have this, others must donate resources. Social contract theory. Another way to view rights is whether they are absolute or limited. An absolute right is a right that is guaranteed without exception, e.g. there is no situation in which it would be reasonable for another person to interfere with your right to life. A limited right is a right that may be restricted based on circumstances. Positive rights are often considered limited, e.g. the right to free education, but states have limited budgets, so there can be an age limit on free education for everyone. Kinds of rights summary. Negative right, a right that another can guarantee by leaving you alone. Positive right, a right obligating others to do something on your behalf. Absolute right, a right guaranteed without exception. Limited right, a right that may be restricted based on the circumstances. Social contract theory, utilitarianism. Utilitarianism interested in the total amount of happiness produced. Unequal distribution of a certain amount of utility is seen as better than an equal distribution of a lesser amount of utility. Social contract theory recognizes the harm that a concentration of wealth and power can cause. The social state is advantageous to men only when all possess something and none has too much. Rousseau. Civil disobedience is difficult to justify under Kantianism and utilitarianism, but with social contract theory, civil disobedience can be the morally right decision when standing up to injustices. John Rawls's Principles of Justice. Rawls proposed two principles of justice to extend the social contract to include a principle dealing with unequal distribution of wealth and power. 1. Each person may claim a fully adequate number of basic rights and liberties, so long as these claims are consistent with everyone else having a claim to the same rights and liberties. 2. Any social and economic inequalities must be associated with positions that everyone has a fair and equal opportunity to achieve. Be to the greatest benefit of the least advantaged members of society. The difference principle. E.g. a graduated tax system where people with higher incomes pay a higher percentage of tax. DVD rental scenario. Bill owns chain of DVD rental stores. Collects information about rentals from customers. Constructs profiles of customers. Sells profiles to direct marketing firms. Some customers happy to receive more mail order catalogs, others unhappy at increase in junk mail. Evaluation, social contract theory. Who are the rational agents? Consider rights of bill, customers, and mail order companies. Does a customer have right to expect name, address to be kept confidential? Has bill violated their right to privacy? If customer rents DVD from bill, who owns information about transaction? If bill and customer have equal rights to information, bill did nothing wrong to sell information. If customers have right to expect name and address a transaction to be confidential without giving permission, then bill was wrong to sell information without asking for permission. Case for social contract theory. Framed in language of rights, which is already well understood in Western-style democracies. Explains why people act in self-interest in the absence of a common agreement. See example on pp. 87–88. Social contract theory is based on the idea that morality is the result of an implicit agreement between rational beings who understand that there is a tension between self-interest and the common good. The common good is best realized when everyone cooperates, i.e., when those acting selfishly suffer negative consequences. Provides clear analysis of certain citizen, government problems. Explains why it is logical to punish someone for a crime. Workable ethical theory. Case against social contract theory. No one-signed contract. Some actions have multiple characterizations. Conflicting rights problem. May unjustly treat people who cannot uphold contract. Comparing workable ethical theories. Divine command theory. Kantianism. Act utilitarianism. Rule utilitarianism. Social contract theory. All of these share the viewpoint that the moral good and moral precepts are objective and exist outside the human mind. These are examples of objectivism. In all but the divine command theory, the ethical decision-making is a rational process by which people can discover objective moral principles with the use of logical reasoning based on facts and commonly held values. Objectivism versus relativism. Objectivism, morality has an existence outside the human mind. Relativism, morality is a human invention. Kantianism, utilitarianism, and social contract theory. Examples of objectivism. Comparing workable ethical theories. Faced with a moral problem, what is the motivation for taking a particular action? Do we think about rights, responsibilities and duties, or do we consider consequences of the action? Kantianism and social contract theory. People should do the right thing. Kantianism starts with duty while social contract theory starts by considering the rights of people involved. Utilitarian theories oriented towards consequences of actions, but rule utilitarianism has rules that people are obliged to follow, so motivation also includes duty. Comparing workable ethical theories. What criteria are used to determine if an action is ethical or unethical? Kantianism, rule utilitarianism and social contract theory use universal moral rules as their metric. An act utilitarian calculates the total change in utility to determine if an action is right or wrong. Is the focus on the individual or the group? Kantianism and social contract theory focus on individual decision-making. Act and rule utilitarianism must consider all affected parties when evaluating the consequences of an action. Comparing workable ethical theories. Summary theory. Motivation criteria. Focus. Kantianism, dutifulness rules individual. Act utilitarianism, consequence actions group. Rule utilitarianism, consequence, duty rules group. Social contract rights rules individual. Morality of breaking the law. What is moral and what is legal are not always identical. Certain actions may be wrong even if no law forbids it. It takes time for laws to be passed, so in a time of rapid change such as the current technological revolution, there can be gaps until the laws are made. The case of illegal copying of CDs is considered from each of the following. Kantian perspective. Rule utilitarian perspective. Act utilitarian perspective. Social contract theory perspective. Kantian legal perspective. Categorical imperative. Act only from moral rules that are universal moral laws. If I think this law is unjust, can I decide to ignore it? Universalize the rule. What if everyone did this? There would be no property right laws with serious consequences. Another approach is to consider the legal rights of the person who owns the copyright. Conclusion. Wrong to copy the CD. Rule utilitarian perspective. What would be the consequences of people ignoring laws they felt to be unjust? Beneficial consequence is happiness of people doing as they please. Harmful consequences. People directly affected will be harmed. People in general would have less respect for law. Increased lawlessness puts additional burden on justice system and society has to pay for this. Conclusion. Wrong to copy the CD. Act utilitarian perspective. What would be the consequences of my action? Suppose I buy a copy of a CD and like it. My friend is in a terrible car crash and is bedbound with no money. I want to help but have little money myself, so I give my friend a copy of the CD. No lost sale. Friend would not have bought it. Increases sale as visitor hear it and like it and then purchase it. I am unlikely to be prosecuted for this action, so no impact on legal system. Harmful consequences. Violated rights of person with a copyright. Conclusion. Overall, the benefits appear to outweigh the harms in this particular case. Social contract theory perspective. Based on assumption that everyone in society ought to bear certain burdens in order to receive certain benefits. The legal system is there to guarantee people's rights are protected. For this reason, we have an obligation to obey the law. Conclusion. Wrong to copy a CD containing copyrighted music because that action violates the legal rights of the person who own the copyright. Conclusion. CD copying case. Our society has laws that grant intellectual property rights to people who do creative work. From the point of view of Kantianism, rule utilitarianism and social contract theory, breaking the law is wrong unless there is a strong overriding moral obligation. This is not the case here. Copying CD is immoral because it is illegal. From act utilitarianism viewpoint, there may be individual circumstances when copying the CD is the right action. Conclusion. None of these four theories is perfect. For each of the theories will solve some moral problems easily but not others. The four theories together have a lot of power.